Hi there, this is S.J. Thomason. Welcome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the quest for the historical Jesus, because I was just listening to a channel with Mr. Nathan Ormond, and Nathan was on there with somebody called Kamil. And Kamil seems to like to perpetuate these ideas that there is a lot of doubt in history concerning Jesus and his resurrection, and those ideas are patently false. And so since they're live right now, I'm not going to be able to go review the comments, but I heard enough of them to want to offer a rebuttal to those of you who are interested in hearing this. But I have some other information from a new book that I'm working on. So I'd like to read you a little bit about some important stuff. The earliest Christians didn't have a Bible, but they did have the Word, which had become flesh in their midst. From the village of Bethlehem, which translates to house of bread in Hebrew, the Word emerged, fulfilling Micah's prophecy. Jesus called himself the Son of Man dozens of times during his ministry, drawing attention to the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven from the book of Daniel. For this reason, Mr. Kamil, for this reason, Jesus was crucified, because he made a direct reference. His Jewish contemporaries knew exactly what that meant, which is why they called for his crucifixion, for claiming to be God. He posed too great a threat to their earthly authority. Jesus didn't claim to be a mere prophet or teacher. Instead, he said, no one comes to the Father except through the Son. And he forgave people, including those who were his enemies, and commanded us to do the same. Forgiveness is the victory of love over sin. The Jews of Jesus's day were all well aware that the time for their Savior to come had come. He would either be a suffering servant or a mighty king, depending on their righteousness. He would come as a light to the Gentiles, revealing the righteousness to all nations. Here's a quote from them. If the people of Israel will be righteous, the Messiah will come on the clouds of heaven. If they will not be righteous, he will come as a poor man riding upon an ass. The Sanhedrin knew the 2,000-year era from the patriarchs until the end of the Mishnaic period had come to a close, so they were expecting their Savior. Many arose during Jesus' time, claiming to be their Savior, yet their followings died out when they died. Perhaps the Sanhedrin considered Jesus on the level of Theudas or Judas the Galilean when they rejected him. Or perhaps their wealth had blinded them to his miracles and spiritual power. Though he was fulfilling 330 prophecies before their very eyes, they couldn't see it. They didn't have the eyes to see, nor the ears to hear. The stone had become the cornerstone. They weren't among his sheep. Jesus arrived in fulfillment of the scriptures, which said he would be pierced for our transgressions 483 years after the decree to rebuild Jerusalem went out. The decree to rebuild Jerusalem occurred in a series of 4 episodes. The last episode occurred in 444 BC by King Artaxerxes in the month of Nisan, when he called for the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. Using the Jewish 360-day calendar and omitting a year 0, 77's less 7, which is coming from the book of Daniel in Daniel 9, leads us to the year 33. Jesus was crucified on Nisan 14, which is April 3rd of the year 33. Around 400 years before Christ, Malachi revealed the Lord would come to his temple, which was written when the second temple was present in Jerusalem. Jesus often preached in the temple, which was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Daniel had even prophesied the temple's destruction. The parallels between Jesus' ministry, crucifixion, death, and resurrection, and the book of Exodus are extraordinary. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of the year, Nisan. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken unto the account of the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old, males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, which is Nisan 14, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides of the tops of the door frames of the houses where they will eat the lambs. That same night, they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roasted over a fire, with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it until morning. If some is left until morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked in your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. Anyone who chose to refrain from eating the Passover lamb would lose his or her firstborn son in the morning. So Jewish families have been diligently following these guidelines ever since. Why don't many Christians celebrate the Passover? Because Jesus is the fulfillment of our Passover. On Palm Sunday, we celebrate Jesus' arrival into Jerusalem on a donkey, just as prophesied in Zechariah. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. The Pharisees demanded that Jesus stop the shouts of his disciples, yet Jesus rebuked them, letting them know that if the disciples were silent, the stones would cry out. Jesus' day of triumphal entry was Nisan 10, which is the same day the unblemished Passover lamb was to be chosen. Jesus presented himself on Nisan 10 as Israel's Paschal lamb. During his ministry, Jesus often performed miracles, telling those he cared to remain quiet about his abilities. He didn't fully come out as the Messiah to the public with until his prophesied and celebrated arrival in Jerusalem on Nisan 10. It was his time to shine. Then on Nisan 14, he was crucified, just as the Passover lamb was slaughtered. This again is going completely against what Mr. Kamil was saying. Jesus was not crucified for any other reason relating to Judas. Jesus was crucified because he claimed to be the Son of Man, coming in the clouds of heaven and sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. Compare the way God parted the skies when John baptized Jesus in the Jordan River to the way God parted the Jordan River during the Exodus so Joshua and the Israelites could enter the promised land of Canaan. Jesus' ministry, crucifixion, and resurrection opened the gates to eternal promised land. 40 years before the Israelites arrived in the land of milk and honey, Moses left Egypt with the 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus also came out of Egypt in fulfillment of the scriptures. Out of Egypt, God called his son. I want to say hi in the chat there, by the way. I see Jokerface and Gavin, and I know Jokerface, you're Adam, I believe, right? Adam, I'm trying to remember from Twitter. So he's been on my channel before, and actually so has Gavin. So welcome, everybody. It's nice to see you guys. Okay, so let's get back to this. About 40 years. 40 years. So Jesus' 40 days of fasting mirrored the Israelites' 40 years in the wilderness following their exodus. Moses went up to Mount Sinai on 2 separate occasions for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving God's commandments and laws. Jesus appeared to his disciples for 40 days after his resurrection. The number 40 is also frequently referenced in the Bible at a time of trial, change, and rebirth. Other examples of 40 include when Elijah fasted for 40 days on Mount Horeb and when it rained for 40 days and 40 nights during the flood. Now, there's some other really interesting parallels in the Bible with respect to the bread of life. Here's a quote, "And it shall come to pass at that self same time that the treasury of manna shall again descend from on high, and they will eat it in those years. Because of these, they are who have come to the consummation of time." During the 40 years of the Exodus, God provided bread from heaven to keep the Israelites nourished. Similarly, Jesus provided bread as nourishment to 5,000. As the bread of life, he continues to nourish our spirits through communion today. On one Sabbath, Jesus' disciples were gathering grain to make bread when the Pharisees condemned them as they were violating the Sabbath. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. He reminded the Pharisees of how King David entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread on the Sabbath. Priests were permitted to work on the Sabbath, and Jesus' apostles, as his priests, were therefore permitted to gather grain. I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So Jesus was making clear to the Pharisees of his identity. The bread of life is a theme throughout the scriptures. It's even part of the prayer Jesus said we should use when we want to communicate with the Lord, asking him to give us this day our daily bread. The Greek word that has been translated as daily bread, ipiosias, appears in other places in the New Testament. Ipiosias means super essential, which translates directly to the bread of life and the Eucharist. Taking the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ, in the form of bread and wine, is therefore crucial to our spiritual growth and connection with the Lord. Hey, Adam. So I'm looking back at the chat, see what you guys are up to. So what have I found outside of the Bible? Okay, so I guess I can take a break from this sort of thing. So what have I found outside the Bible? We got a lot of extra biblical sources. We've got 33 Christian sources and 9 secular sources, actually even hostile sources towards Jesus within the first 150 years of Jesus' resurrection. So we have a lot of outside information. We also have a lot of, we have information in the 33 sources that speak to Jesus' death, resurrection. There's a lot of evidence of Bible quoting. We also know that the 4 Gospels were directly attributed by numerous people to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and nobody else. There were no ancient attributions to anyone other than those 4. So that's what's important about that, is because people like Bart Ehrman like to pretend like the Gospels were anonymous. People like Bart Ehrman also like to pretend that there are some irresolvable conflicts between the 4 empty tomb accounts. However, he's just wrong. They're easily reconcilable, which I did in my last video, or one of my last videos. So that's another thing. We also have people who say today and over the centuries that Jesus has appeared to them to this day. We have people who've said that in dreams, Jesus appears to them. We have people like me. I'll say that too. Jesus has appeared to me in a dream, and he's appeared to me in a vision. And actually, I've also seen a couple of signs in the sky a couple of times. So there's been some pretty neat stuff, and that's interesting. Contemporary would be people who are in Jesus's time. Now we have lots of evidence of contemporary people in Jesus's time. So for example, we have Matthew the tax collector. We have some internal evidence that Matthew, the tax collector, is the one who wrote the book of Matthew. Why? Well, because we have a couple of parables that are basically associated with tax collectors in the book of Matthew. We also have a story where Jesus is paying his taxes based on getting a drachma out of a fish's mouth, giving us, again, some support for the assertion that the book of Matthew, while all of the ancients attributed to Matthew, it was also Matthew, the disciple who traveled with Jesus. So that's certainly contemporary. Then with the story of Mark, what do we have with Mark? Well, we know that Mark, according to the epistles and according to other documents, is John Mark, and John Mark knew Peter very well. And so John Mark was kind of like Peter's mouthpiece, and they've guessed that he was the first one to write the Gospels. And of course, I mentioned Mark 14:62, which is a really important book, and mentioned that Jesus was crucified essentially because he claimed to be the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. Then we have Luke. Luke took great pains to write what he called an orderly account. Luke actually traveled with Paul starting in Acts 16 when he starts referring to himself in the first person. So Luke is certainly contemporary to Jesus's time. He's traveling with Paul, and he was shipwrecked. You've got some of the information with Luke that corresponds with Paul. Now, Luke meeting Paul also met Peter. And Peter, John, James, a lot of them were together quite a bit in ancient times. So we have that information. Now, because we go to the book of Acts and we say to ourselves, okay, when was the book of Acts written? Well, here's the big point. The book of Acts has 2 main characters, Peter and Paul. There were also some tangential characters, such as James, the son of Zebedee, and Stephen, the first martyr. So in the book of Acts, Luke documents the deaths of Stephen, the first martyr. We've got the stoning of Stephen mentioned, and we also have the death of James mentioned under King Herod, James, the son of Zebedee. What we don't have, interestingly, are the 2 crucifixions that have been attested to extra biblically of Peter and Paul. So you would think that if the book is written after they were crucified, the author, Luke, would definitely have made mention of that. However, the evidence we have suggests that it was written prior to their crucifixion and beheading, which occurred in the early 60s. And so we've got very good evidence. So now if we know that Acts was written in the early 60s, we know that Luke preceded it because Luke was again writing an orderly account. So Luke preceded that. So then we also know that Matthew and Mark preceded Luke. So now we've got very early dating of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Acts. Okay. And then we also, of course, have Paul, who wrote between 6 and 13 books of the New Testament. And of course, Paul, because he was beheaded under Nero, that we know that obviously clearly he had to write his books prior to that time, which was anywhere between 62 and 64. So we have a lot of early information concerning Jesus. And so I would feel pretty badly if I tried to make any assertions that it was after 70. Now, why do people make the assertions that the book's written after 70? Well, they're super natural bias, as I mentioned before. It's just a bias because they don't like the fact that Jesus predicted the temple was going to be destroyed, which occurred in the year 70. So people, when they come up with that 70 date, it seems very arbitrary why they pick 70. Well, we know why they're doing it. They don't want to admit the truth of what's going on. And so that's a pretty big deal. So what other internal evidence do we have, for example, that the author John is the author of the book of John? Now, it's possible John was written after. It is possible. It's a possible thing that John and the book of Revelation were written a little bit later. It doesn't really matter to me when that book is written. It's assumed that John was pretty young when he met Jesus. That's one thing that a lot of the artists and people like that have said, that John was pretty young and Peter was a lot older. And that's why one of the reasons why Peter was Jesus' rock. But this idea with John, there's a few things that are internal in the book of John that signify that this is written by John, who was one of Jesus's disciples. And some of the evidence is the fact that John is in the book of John is the only place where it's reported that John was with Peter when they went to see Jesus's trial. John was given access. We also know that John was referring to himself as Jesus' beloved. He's doing that to do a parallel to people like us. When we're reading the Bible, we can think of us as Jesus' beloved. John was the only one to be present of the male disciples at Jesus' crucifixion. The other ones all went into hiding. And how embarrassing is that? So you've got the older ones like Peter going into hiding. John is the only one also who reports that he ran with Peter to the empty tomb when the women reported that the empty tomb was empty. He reported he ran to the empty tomb with Peter and he outran Peter. And this is only reported in the book of John. And of course, in the end of the book of John, he says himself that he recorded it. Okay, he says it's his beloved disciple. He further used the phrase of his beloved disciple as the man who was sitting next to Jesus during the Last Supper. And this was verified in the other books of who the beloved disciple was it's John. And so we've got a lot of information leading us to assume that this author is who he said he was, which is John, Jesus's beloved disciple. We also know from John's book that Jesus said to his mother that John would be taking care of Jesus. John would be taking care of Mary. Now, why would Jesus have picked John to take care of Mary? Two reasons. One is Jesus told John that, even told Peter, why do you care about when or how this one dies or anything like that? Why do you care? And so John is the one reportedly who was not crucified, not beheaded. John was not martyred like the other ones. He was instead exiled to the island of Patmos, which is where it's believed that he wrote the gospel and he wrote the book of Revelation and he wrote First John and other books. And so we have that information too. Now, if we go to John, we also know, again, why would Jesus pick John? Number one, Jesus knew John wouldn't be martyred, so John would be around for a while to take care of Jesus's mother. And number two, John was pretty young, so John was going to be sticking around for a while. And so we don't know how old Mary was when she gave birth, but it is guessed that she was a pretty young woman, maybe 16, 17 years old. So she wouldn't have been that much older. She'd probably be maybe about 50 years old when they faced the crucifixion. And so that's something going on there. So if she's say 50 years old, she could have another 30, 40 years. And so John would be a good one to be able to take care of her. Plus Jesus also knew that his brothers, and we do have documentation from Josephus that Jesus's half-brother James was martyred as well. So Jesus knew that maybe his other brothers would not be able to take care of his mother. So that role was given to John. And so that's another pretty important little fact. So I was reading up a little bit about the Deuterocanonical Books and the book of Baruch. It's considered a Deuterocanonical book of the Bible. It's excluded from the pages in Jewish and Pentecostal traditions. One reason for its exclusion is a desire to be consistent with what Jewish people consider to be their scripture. It seems a debate has been waged throughout history on when the Jewish people excluded this and other similar books. Interestingly, the letter of Jeremiah from Baruch, Tobit, Sirach, Psalm 151, and 1st Enoch have been recovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date to around 150 BC. I just want to give you another little fun fact, suggesting that one group of early Jews, the Essenes at Qumran, considered them to be pretty important. So we've got these interesting books. So I've been starting to read a little bit outside of the Bible into some of these extra biblical books. And I do find them really interesting. Enoch's extremely interesting with respect to angels and the Nephilim and that kind of thing. And so I've been doing a little bit of investigation on the Nephilim and on angels and on demons and that kind of stuff. So I will be doing a video on that when I finish my investigations. I've read Michael Heiser's really good book on angels, and so I'd highly recommend that. So we have, here's a quote from Baruch 3:10-13. How has it happened, Israel, that you are in your enemies' land, that you have grown old in a strange country, that you are defiled with the dead, that you are counted with those who go down into the grave? You have forsaken the fountain of wisdom. You know, here's what I find interesting. That book is in the Dead Sea Scrolls. However, you can listen to that passage. Doesn't this sound like something that they would be talking about after the destruction in 70? Of course, the book was written before that, but I'm just saying this particular quote might have bugged them because Israel was dispersed in the year 70. The Israelites had to, it's what they call the diaspora. They went all over the world and they were out of their country. And here we've got Baruch 3:10-13, basically saying, how is it, Israel, you're in your enemy's land, that you have grown old in a strange country? Baruch is prophesying what exactly happened to the Jews. And so the Jewish people and later Protestants excluded the book of Baruch from the Bible, but it is in Catholic tradition. So we've got some books in Catholic traditions, and it's just an interesting read when you think about it that way, that this book basically is talking about what ended up happening to the Israelites. And so we saw that. So then we have, again, the Israelites were dispersed all over the world for 1878 years. They didn't have a temple. They didn't have anything. And what are we seeing right now as far as signs of the end times? Well, you guys have probably been looking around for signs. One thing is we know that Israel's back. We know that in the book of Daniel that there has to be a third temple, essentially. There's going to be a third temple. And we know that the abomination of desolation is going to appear in the third temple. Okay, so right now, if they were to build the third temple, they're going to have to build it on what they call the Temple of the Dome, which is a Muslim mosque that's located exactly on the site of where the second temple used to be. So it's not going to be easy to build a temple where there's already a Muslim mosque, and it's a very big Muslim mosque. It's a very famous one. So that's a pretty big deal. Baruch is spelled B-A-R-U-C-H, Brian. So that's a pretty big deal. So for the third temple to come back, if it's going to be on that location, which is probably where it would have to be, somehow this other mosque would have to be removed. And I can't imagine that happening without some sort of a war, but we'll have to see. Or people are talking about building the temple at a different place. So they are talking about that. There are people who actually have formed a group in Israel who call themselves the Pharisees, I'm sorry, they call themselves the Sanhedrin, and they're making a lot of clatter over having a third temple. Why do they want a third temple? I don't know. That would definitely usher in some of the end times. Now, what do the Muslims say about the end times? What's interesting is if you go and you look in a lot of these extra Quran, we call it extra biblical, I'll say extra Quran writings and other writings in the Quran with respect to the end time, is they have someone who's going to be coming, who's supposed to be powerful. According to them, this particular person's called the Mahdi. And the Mahdi is going to basically show up with a scar over one eye, unable to see in one eye, with some sort of a wound that looks like it should have been fatal. And this Mahdi is a parallel of our Antichrist. So we mentioned the Antichrist in the book of Revelation. They mentioned the Mahdi. They say that Jesus is going to bow to their Mahdi. They also say that everyone on earth is going to have to convert to Islam or die. Now, according to our books, what it says is that, obviously that's not what it says in our books. Our books say that there's going to be sort of a rapture. People who are Christians are all of a sudden going to be lifted into the heavens. And then the Mahdi is going to appear. It's going to be here, or not Mahdi, I'm sorry, the Antichrist is going to be here for about 3.5 years. And he is going to force everyone to wear a mark, the mark of the beast. And if you don't have that mark, you're probably not going to be able to buy anything. So it might be one of those things where you have to have some sort of microchip put into your arm or something like that to be able to make any sort of purchases. It's actually going to be a really scary time. So there's a lot of information about that kind of thing. And so, yeah, in the Quran, what's interesting is I found this out from a Muslim, a former Muslim who's a Christian, really, really great guy. He told me that when he was a Muslim, the initial thing wasn't that Gabriel appeared to Muhammad in a cave. The original idea was somebody else appeared to him in a cave, and they originally said it was a demon. And so I could actually completely buy that. And sorry if I'm mentioning this little kind of tidbits of information, but I consider the Quran a phony book. And one of the reasons I consider it a phony book is because we have plenty of support that Jesus was crucified, coming even from extra biblical sources who were hostile, like Josephus. And excuse me, and Suetonius and a few others. So we have this information that Jesus was crucified. And who's the other one? Oh, also under the Talmud. So we've got extra biblical hostile sources giving us that Jesus was crucified. Now, what it says in the Quran is a really vague passage with respect to Jesus' crucifixion. And it says that the people who were trying to persecute Jesus did not crucify him, and that God had taken him prior to the crucifixion. So their book basically is completely denying the foundation of the Christian faith, which is Jesus's crucifixion and resurrection. And so that is a big problem with their book. And so they cherry pick certain parts, or Muhammad has cherry picked certain parts of the books. He said certain parts are valid, then they say other parts aren't valid. And David Wood has really good work on that. I don't know much about the Muslim faith to speak as like he does, but he knows quite a bit about the Muslim faith, and he's been rattling a lot of cages and converting a lot of people, apparently, especially from India, which is kind of interesting. So that's a thing. Yeah, we do have support. I'm sorry, Adam, that's actually patently untrue. We have plenty of support that Jesus was crucified. In fact, I will go ahead and get some of this support so I can read you exactly what we have, just in case you're wondering, in case you're interested. All right, I'm going to read you a couple of quotes that we know are true. All right, so as I'm pulling this up, okay, I'm going to go to Suetonius first. And S-U-E-T. Okay, so let's go. All right, so here's what we have. Extra crucifixion. Jesus' existence, just so you know, was supported by Tacitus, Josephus, Pliny the Younger, Mara bar Serapion, Suetonius, Thales, as recorded by Africanus, Phlegon, as recorded by Origen, Lucian. Okay, so we've got that kind of stuff. And so here's what we know. Celsus said Jesus claimed to be born of a virgin and that he lived in Egypt at one point. He further said Jesus had miraculous powers. Josephus said he was a wonder worker, while those who wrote the Talmud said he practiced sorcery. Phlegon said he had knowledge of the future. He was a virtuous and wise king, according to Josephus and Mara bar Serapion, who was apparently a prisoner, who also called him a teacher. Celsus said he claimed to be God, and Lucian and Pliny the Younger said he was worshipped as a god by his followers. The Talmud recorded his execution was ordered because he was, quote, enticing Israel to apostasy and practicing sorcery. Tacitus and Mara bar Serapion recorded his execution, which Tacitus noted was under Pontius Pilate. Josephus, Celsus, and Lucian specified the crucifixion. Okay, did you hear that, Adam? Let me go back in case you missed that. Josephus, Celsus, and Lucian specified Jesus's crucifixion. These are hostile people towards Christianity. These were non-Christians who are giving us the information. We also, of course, have information in the four Gospels. We've got information from Paul. We have information from the early church fathers. So denying that is really sort of putting the wool over your eyes. You're not being truthful with yourself and the information that we have. So yeah, so that's the bottom line. So what do we have here going on? I'm going to go to the chat and say hi to everybody I see in here. I see we've got Joker Face, that of course is Adam, John Lloyd, T. Grogan, Slam RN, Susan, my friend. So do you guys have anything else you think we should be chat about? Who am I quoting? Well, let me go ahead and get my little book out in front of me again. I will read, just in case you guys are wondering, I am going to read some specific quotes from these people. Okay, so let's see, where am I going to find a good one? Here's what Tacitus said, in case people are saying, in fact, this is one of the reasons I'm making this video, is because I was disgusted with what I was hearing this little person called Kamil on Nathan Orman's channel saying right now. So I was listening and I got mad. I thought, he is just saying this stuff and it's not even true. So, you know, he's writing off what Tacitus said. Now, here's exactly what Tacitus said. I've got a quote from Tacitus. Nay, they proceeded to, because he's saying that we don't have much evidence of people being persecuted and crucified and that kind of thing. Here's Tacitus, quote, nay, they proceeded to that degree of impiety as to cast away their dead bodies without burial, although the Jews used to take so much care of the burial of men that they took down those that were condemned and crucified and buried them before the going down of the sun. The bodies of the deceased, they, the Jews, chose to bury rather than burn. Jesus' disciples said Jesus appeared to them alive 3 days after the crucifixion. Okay, according to Josephus. Now, that was my part. So I'm just going to add on another thing that, quoting back to Tacitus. Therefore, to scotch the rumor, Nero substituted as culprits and punished with the utmost refinements of cruelty a class of men loathed for their vices, whom the crowd styled Christians. Christus, the founder of the name, had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Tiberius by sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilatus, and the pernicious superstition was checked for a moment, only to break out once more, not merely in Judea, the home of the disease, but in the capital itself, where all things horrible and shameful in the world collect and find a vogue. First, then, the confessed members of the sect were arrested. Next, on their disclosures, vast numbers were convicted, not so much on the count of arson as for hatred of the human race, and derision accompanied their end. They were covered with wild beast skins and torn to death by dogs, or they were fastened on crosses, and when daylight failed, were burned to serve as lamps by night. Nero had offered his gardens for the spectacle and gave an exhibition in his circus, mixing with the crowd in the habit of a charioteer or mounted on his car. Hence, in spite of the guilt, which had earned the most exemplary punishment, there arose a sentiment of pity due to the impression that they were being sacrificed, not for the welfare of the state, but to the ferocity of a single man, okay? So that is what Tacitus said. Now here's Josephus. At this time, and this is the uncontested passage, there is a passage in Josephus that it is thought that some Christians might have added to and made an embellishment, but this is the uncontested portion. At this time, there was a wise man who was called Jesus. His conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. And many people from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die. And those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. And of course, Pliny the Younger details to his letter to Trajan. I encourage you guys to read that. But in the letter, he basically says that any Christians who refused to recant were murdered, essentially. Lucian, here's what Lucian says. Here's a quote again. It was now that he came across the priests and scribes of the Christians in Palestine. They picked up their queer creed. I can tell you, he pretty soon convinced them of his superiority. Prophet, elder, ruler of the synagogue. He was everything at once. Expounded their books, commented on them, wrote books himself. They took him for a god, accepted his laws, and declared him their president. The Christians, you know, worship a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites and was crucified on that account. Well, the end of it was that Proteus was arrested and thrown into prison. This was the very thing to lend an air to his favorite arts of the claptrap and wonder working. He was now a made man. The Christians took it all very seriously. He was no sooner in prison than they began trying every means to get him out again, but without success. Okay, and so there's more to that kind of thing. So far I've named a few. We also have a comment from Origen on Celsus, giving us some support. We've got Marabar Serapion, and basically talking about Jesus as a wise man. Suetonius said, as the Jews were making constant disturbances at the instigation of Christus, he expelled them from Rome. So it's really not legitimate to try to deny that Jesus was crucified. This is why Muhammad is completely in the dark. He doesn't seem to realize that yes, Jesus was crucified. We've got attestations inside the Bible, outside the Bible, and even from hostile witnesses from early ancient times. So by the time Muhammad came around the year 630, he made up his whole story about Jesus not being crucified. And of course, that's patently false. So I'm going to look at the chat right now and see if you guys want to. Utopia Buster, I just saw something funny. Wait, I just missed it. I saw Richard Carrier. No, there is speculation from little Richard Carrier that there's forgery in Josephus, but no real historian believes that. There might be I have to say, there's one portion of Josephus where there could be a bit of hyperbole, a little bit of speculation that maybe it wasn't written by Josephus, but the part I read is the uncontested portion. Okay, so I'm not reading the part that was the contested portion. Of course, we also have verification, even from the Jewish people in the Talmud. So we've got a lot of early documentation suggesting support. So, no Christian writer. Oh yeah, I'm trying to catch some of these things. Would I debate Kamil? I would, yeah, of course I debate Kamil. Bring him on. I listen to him and I think to myself, this isn't even, it's like listening to Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman is purposely trying to skew the information that we have. One of the things, as I mentioned before, you can reconcile the empty tomb accounts pretty easily. I did it here on this channel just a couple days ago. And Bart Ehrman basically tries to pretend that they're irreconcilable. I mean, that's the kind of thing that people will steer you guys wrong. It's terrible. And these people who are they think these Jesus mythicists like Richard Carrier and Godless Engineer, and who's another one, Robert Price, they have absolutely no support. If you look at all of the sources we have, it's a completely irresponsible position to claim the man didn't even walk the earth. It doesn't make any sense. Now, Richard Carrier is funny because he'll say that Jesus didn't walk the earth out of one side of his mouth, and the other side he just says he doesn't care, and that there's like a 30% chance that maybe he did. I mean, how do you put a percent chance? He doesn't go back and look at all the historical documents. So it truly is not a reasonable position to take when you do that kind of thing. So they were trying to get me a link to join the live stream. Who was trying to get? Oh, Nathan and Kamil. Okay, yeah, I got a little frustrated with them, so I had to leave their thing and prepare this one. So. So I would go, yeah, I would definitely debate Kamil. That would be probably a pretty fun debate. I'd debate him on whether Jesus resurrected. So brainless engineer, you got it wrong, SJ. Brainless engineer. So how did I get it wrong, Mr. Brainless Engineer, or female brainless engineer? I guess I don't know. So rattle off a list of names, and that constitutes evidence for this lady. No, I didn't just rattle off a list of names, T. Grogan. I rattled off the exact quotations from these people that give us information. I got my PhD in business administration with specializations in international management and human resource management. Okay, so that's what my PhD is in. And I teach courses, in case you're wondering, at the college level. At the undergraduate level, I teach human resource management and other classes sometimes. And I teach at the graduate level, I teach leadership courses to MBA students. I teach communication courses to MBA students. And I teach cross-cultural information, cross-cultural management, and communication to EMBA, executive MBA students. And so I teach a lot of different classes. This summer, I'll be teaching, right now I'm teaching HR and the cross-cultural class. And a leadership class. And then this summer, I'm going to be teaching human resource management and a business communication class. And so that is what I'm doing. So let's see. Yeah, I do have a real PhD. I know it's not in a Bible field. I'm actually kind of bummed it's not in a Bible field, but I'm a really practical person. And I decided business was the way to go for me because I looked around at the salaries. I'll be honest, I looked around at the salaries of people who were in different fields as PhDs, and I looked around at the amount of time it takes to get PhDs in certain fields. You know, my sister-in-law took 10 years to get a PhD in art history. And yeah, I am born again, that's true. So thank you, John Lloyd, for that. That's a very nice, generous chat. So no, I looked around and I wanted to get a degree in a field that I knew I could make a pretty decent salary. The business fields usually make about twice of what PhDs do in, say, history and the social sciences, and even the natural sciences, and also in the arts and letters. So the business PhD, literally about twice as much, if not more. Sometimes if you're entrepreneurship or accounting, you can make even a lot more than that. So that's one of the reasons I chose the field, is because I was interested in being able to support my family. And so that was a reason. But what's nice is what I'm doing now is I'm also trying to study stuff that I can blend my field with my Christian interests. And so I'm really looking into studies right now on ethics. So I'm working on a study on psychological entitlement and ethics and objective morality. And I'm also working on another study on coaching, the benefits of coaching, because I also oversee our coaching program where we pair professional coaches and business leaders with MBA students. And so I do that, and EMBA students. And so I do that, and we collect reflection papers from them. And so I did a content analysis of the reflection papers to get some overall themes. And you just find that there's a lot of really good benefits to coaching. So students are getting coached 3 times over a semester, and they're really getting a lot out of it, which is giving me makes me feel really good, because that's why I'm overseeing that program. So actually, I have a funny story of why I'm overseeing the coaching program. I'll just tell you really quickly. I was associate dean at our school for 5 years, and I decided in 2016 that I was going to step down. And I was sitting in my office one day, and this woman came in my office who was also in my management department. Her name's Mary Ann. And she came in and she said, "Oh, would I like to take over the coaching program because she's retiring?" And I said, "Absolutely not. I'm going to go upstairs. I'm done with administration. I'm going to go back up into my office and I'll do research and enjoy myself and all that kind of fun stuff." And she said, "Well, can I just send you some of the reflection papers?" I said, "Okay, yeah, you sure, send me the reflection papers." So she sends me a stack of reflection papers, and I read them, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a really valuable program. These students are getting so much out of this. They're getting better jobs. They're getting, they're getting more confidence. They're better communicators. And so I called her up and I said, Marianne, we can't let this program go. And she said, I agree. So, but you're the only one who could take care of it. And I said, oh, well, maybe somebody else will want to do it. No, it turns out nobody else wants to take care of the coaching program. And it was pretty much, it had to go. So I was a coaching. So I became the head of our coaching program. And I also am back in our leadership center because I started off in the leadership center and then left to be associate dean and then came back. And so, yeah, I was associate dean of the College of Business at the University of Tampa for 5 years between 2011 and 2016. And actually I won a service award at the end of it because my dean really liked the job I did. So I worked really hard. And so, so I have more spare time now, which maybe isn't good. I'm using it, but I'm using it in this way to try to bring messages out to people of the truth. And so, yeah, coaching is really cool. And our coaches, we have 80 coaches. A lot of them come from the International Coaching Federation, and they're just really great people. They just want to give back. They do it voluntarily. Here's the thing, they don't get paid to do it. They do it because they want to do it. They want to get to know our students. They want to help the lives and help influence the next generation of leaders. And so they're just an amazing group of people. And so I love working with them. And so I'll do that until I retire probably. And then I'll walk into somebody else's office and do exactly what Marianne did to me. So that's the bottom line. So it's all pretty good. So it says the Tacitus manuscript is from the 11th century, found in a Benedictine monastery. Does that mean it's not legitimate? Because I have heard people who are considered scholars in Tacitus that there's no reason to doubt that the authenticity of the passage that I read to you. So I don't think that we have a good reason to doubt that. Now I realize what a lot of people will do, like people like Jim Majors and other ones is Bart Ehrman, is they'll go one by one and try to discount all of these extra biblical sources. And they'll only count, here's the interesting thing, they'll only count, they only think the sources that are valid are the ones that are hostile to Christianity. Now think about this. If you were living back at that time and you heard about Jesus and you saw his disciples who were just very insistent on the fact that Jesus resurrected, and they were willing to go to their deaths rather than recant this information. They said they saw the risen Christ. They preached for him for decades. Wouldn't it be pretty likely that you might become a Christian yourself? And so that's what happened. So that's why we have 33 Christian sources in 150 years that have supported all aspects of the ministry of Jesus and his death and crucifixion, and resurrection. So that is what's going on. So thank you so much, Susan. So what am I talking about? Tacitus was born in the 1st century. Yeah, exactly. And so I know, I fear sometimes you guys have to ask yourselves, if you're denying, if you've read enough about Christianity, you've read the Gospels, and you've looked at this information that I've looked at, you've looked at, say, even Josh and Sean McDowell's book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, you've looked at that kind of stuff, and you're not, and you don't have an explanation for why the disciples did what they did over decades, because there's no material explanation. They certainly didn't benefit from it materially. So if you knew that kind of thing's going on, you have to be really honest with yourself. Why are you denying Jesus? Why? So, I mean, you could go look at information. I've looked at information in other cultures around the world and that sort of thing. And your uncle died a Mormon. Well, I can say I think Mormons are, as I mentioned a lot of times before, I think Mormons are good people. So they have a lot of business ethic. They're industrious. I've seen some real straight, good people. And when I say straight, I mean just like they're like like Mitt Romney types. They're just kind of straight shooters. They're not out there to dupe anybody. They seem pretty honest. So that's the deal. The guy who claimed Utopia Buster, I have to agree with you there. So Sumaya knew Muhammad and died for her belief in him of prophet. Okay, but Muhammad didn't appear to anybody after the dead. So Muhammad doesn't have the kind of legitimacy that Jesus has. Also, just in case you didn't know, Muhammad had 12 wives. So one would merely just look at Muhammad's lifestyle versus Jesus' lifestyle, like Nabil Qureshi did. So here's Muhammad. He has 12 wives. Jesus has 0 wives, okay? Muhammad had one wife who was 6 years old named Aisha when he got married to her. He was 53 at the time, and he consummated the marriage when she was 9. Jesus didn't do any of that. Okay. Then we have Muhammad basically went into war. He went into battle quite a few times. He was known to kill physically himself a lot of Christians, Jews, and people who were not believers. So Muhammad did that. So Jesus killed nobody. Okay, so Muhammad killed all of those people. Jesus killed nobody. So Jesus said, "He who lives by the sword dies by the sword." Christianity started off as a religion of peace. First few hundred years, 280 years, they were peacefully sort of spreading the message. And Muhammad didn't. Muhammad initially started off as a warrior, and the only way that the Muslim faith has spread has been through war. Okay, so, and the fact that in many countries of the world, if you leave the Muslim faith, there's a good chance that you're going to be killed. You can find this with the Pew studies. I actually identified all the countries in this last book that I wrote of places that you could be killed just because you decide to renounce your Muslim faith. Okay, so you can be killed for that, or jailed. So you're not allowed to leave the faith. Now imagine that in Christianity, we can come and go just as we please. In fact, Brian, you're a good example of somebody who's gone. You decided you didn't want to believe. Now, the other thing about Christian faith over the Muslim faith is God told in the Christian faith, it's like you can make that choice. We're given free will. We're not forced to remain in our faith. We're not, the faith didn't grow because Christians were out there grabbing land in the first 280 years. And I mentioned 280 years because at the year 313, Constantine legalized Christianity, finally gave Christians legal rights. And then Christianity really started to grow. And then of course we did have some instances where, because the Muslims had been constantly land clawing for years, the Christians started fighting back. And that's what we saw with the Crusades. So that was the Christians fighting back against the Muslims who'd been grabbing land for years. And the Christians had decided they wanted to go back and take over the Holy Land. But many of them died. So thousands and thousands died. So that was some pretty bad wars. So there were some wars in our past. But has Christianity been a net positive? Absolutely. Look at the West compared to any other country. Look at the fact that we have this high levels of individualism and value for individuals, and this whole idea in the United States of all men are created equally. In case you guys are wondering, you know the United States is the third largest country in the world, population-wise. So we've got China and India tying at about, China and India are tying at about 1.4 billion. You've got the United States with 330 million. That's one of the reasons why the world pays so much attention to what's going on in the United States, because we're such a large country. So when people say our percentage of, or the number of people who've been dying from the coronavirus in the United States is high, and if they don't include as a percentage of the population, they're not being honest. Because a lot of these other countries where they had coronavirus have not nearly as many people as we have. And so that's a factor that really needs to be considered when you're thinking about that kind of stuff. All right, so what else are we doing here, people? Would you guys like to chat about anything in particular? So I like all the people in the chat. Say hi to all of you. So, and Mind Onion, I don't know, Mind Onion, are you an atheist or are you a Christian? I always wonder what people are in here. I did see T. Grogan's message that was in there about people going to, it's when you say about hell is a choice that people make. It's you decide that you don't want to be with God, essentially. And so God doesn't force people to be with him. And so hell is this option of being without God and without love. And it's a terrible option. I would never make it, but some people do. So that's an issue. Rabid individualism has the rabid individualism been all good? I think it is contributing to the moral decline. Interesting. Yeah. So let's think about things that individualism has helped. It's helped this idea of what they call the Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism. The idea that an individual can rise from rags to riches if he works really hard or she works really hard. Individualism has contributed definitely to this idea of entrepreneurship and creativity and innovation. And it's played out in the United States. In fact, according to Gert Hofstede and the Globe studies, we in the United States have the highest levels of individualism in the world. So where do you find collective countries? Collective countries that have high levels of in-group collectivism tend to be in South America and in Asia, like India, China, Korea, those kind of places. And then the high levels of what they call institutional collectivism, you tend to find that in places like if I've stolen it. Wait, you find high levels. I'm going to get to this in a second, Nathan. I saw this, very funny. Yeah, I'll tell you, this is my son's shirt. I'm wearing it because they grow out of their shirts and then I take them over. So it's like, they're at this perfect age where I'm getting a lot of new shirts. I got Guy Harvey shirts. I'm getting all the good stuff. But no, institutional collectivism, if you go to places like Northern Europe, they have very high levels of what they call institutional collectivism. And you'll see in those kinds of places where they have really high taxes and high social safety nets. But we've noticed in these places with very high levels of institutional collectivism, like Sweden and Norway and places like that, that they have the high social safety nets. That's where people have been leaving the churches. Okay, so a lot of people with maybe high levels of what they call extrinsic religiosity maybe would have gone to churches for the benefits of the community, or that the church could help them out financially, but they've left the churches in a lot of the cases in those countries because of social safety nets. A lot of them are just, the government takes care of their poor. They don't have to take care of the poor. That's how the United States is different, is we have lower taxes relative to them, and definitely lower levels of institutional collectivism. We really don't have much collectivism here in the United States at all. And so that's why everything's different. Our tax system is different. We don't have universal health care. A lot of people are told themselves to go take care of the poor rather than the government taking care of the poor as much. Although right now with this terrible coronavirus, we're seeing a lot of stuff going on with that. But anyway, so why I'm mentioning this kind of stuff is collectivism taken to its extreme could end up being communism or socialism. And so that's also where you see socialism and communism in these other countries that tend to be collective. And this idea of people working in these groups, that tends to be something that's valued in those kind of places, and it doesn't work out. So one thing I fear is that people who are endorsing things like communism, I mean, there's this guy called Vaush who gets in there and he tries to pretend like communism or Marxism is some sort of a glory. It's crazy. It's like he didn't even pay attention to what happened in the USSR and China and Cambodia in the last century, when they've estimated about 120 million people perished. What they do in Russia, just to mention what they used to do. So the communists would tell all the farmers that they had to grow their food, and the communists would not let them keep any of the food they grew. In fact, they could be punished with death if they kept the food they grew. So they died of starvation, and they took all the food that they grew in the farms and they put them into the cities. And so that's the kind of thing that we saw, this horrific output of communism. And it was just a logical outflow of the idea that you're going to be working for the collective, and the collective might even take away all of your money. It's really bad. So going to hell has always been a choice according to Christianity. Are you forced to go to Venezuela? Yeah, Venezuela is another very bad deal. And why is Venezuela such a bad deal? Well, because first you get Hugo. It used to be pretty good. I actually was in Venezuela off a cruise ship years ago in the 90s, and it was really nice there. But Venezuela with Hugo Chavez and Maduro has been a pretty big nightmare, because what they did was they decided that the government was going to supplement a lot of their electricity bills and was going to supplement their gas, like their automobile gas. So what happens after that is you have the natural sort of outflows. So the economists would tell us that people would actually leave Venezuela and they go into Colombia, and they'd come from Colombia, buy gas in Venezuela, go back to Colombia, doing little things like that, going back and forth. Well, now Venezuela is pretty much bankrupt. You've got thousands of people starving, and it's to such an extent that the doctors are no longer allowed to, when somebody dies, to say that death was due to starvation. So yeah, socialism and communism are pretty close, but there are forms of socialism that tend to work in places like Sweden that are high levels of institutional collectivism. I don't think they'd fly over here purely because of the tax rates and that sort of thing. But in Sweden, there are some pretty good deals for people. If you're, say, a mother and you're having a baby, you and the father are entitled to a year of paid leave. I mean, we just don't get that here. We're entitled to 12 weeks unpaid leave for maternity leave. And it's up to the company if they want to give you paternity leave. And so we've got different things like that. And so, yeah, and they go into Colombia. Definitely Colombia right now has been overrun by a lot of people who are Venezuelan trying to get away. So my EMBA students actually just got back from Colombia. They took a trip to Colombia and Panama, and so they had really interesting reflections on what they saw down there. And they did encounter a lot of Venezuelans. And so that was a pretty interesting thing. Yeah, Vaush, low-hanging fruit. It was like, I've seen Vaush on Modern Day Debate, and I've seen him on Adam Friended's channel. He's interesting, to say the least. Seeing all the prosperity preachers like Joel Osteen make me realize how insane what we've created is. Yeah. Well, I'll give you, Joel Osteen is, here's the funny thing. My dad likes Joel Osteen, not because my dad's religious. He's totally against church. My dad is probably more of, I mean, he's a very weak Christian, but he thinks Joel Osteen it kind of amuses him, because here Joel Osteen gets up and he preaches all of these messages, and then he has a $10 million house, and come on, a $10 million house, really? So he's not paying attention to that little line in the Bible that says that the wealthy, it's easier to get a camel through a needle than to get a wealthy man to heaven. So yeah, well, I'm not going to go too much longer, Brian, but I would be willing to go onto Nathan's channel tomorrow, or onto, you have this exact same shirt, Nathan. Come on, really? It's so funny. Hey, Nathan, maybe if you come on my channel or I go on your channel, maybe tomorrow or the next day, maybe we should both wear the red shirt. Like, I'll wear it again and we can match. I actually have a black one too, just like this, Nathan. So if you have a black one, you'll have to let me know. You have a black shirt that's got the stripes, see the stripes on the arm. So so you can let me know. And and as I said, this was my son's shirt. My sons didn't wear, sometimes they won't wear the shirts I get for them. So I just take them back over. So that's the bottom line. Utopia Buster doesn't do debates. Okay, Mind Onion. I don't think that holds up. Okay, so what else? Oh, so Nathan in Veracruz. Yeah, I've got the same thing. Is my dad going to hell? No, listen, and I'll let T. Grogan get that up there. No, T. Grogan, my dad is not going to go there. And neither are my brother, who's decided he's an agnostic, nor my two sister-in-laws, who also have decided, oh my gosh, you have a black one too? Okay, tomorrow. So I've got two sister-in-laws who told me they're agnostic. In fact, my one sister-in-law, here's the interesting thing about her. And I can tell you which sister-in-law she is, because I don't want her to read this or see this video one day and hear me talking about her. But one of my sister-in-laws is kind of amusing, because she was a Catholic, and then she went to get her PhD. She spent like 10 years getting a PhD in art history. And then she tells me, like, one day we're all sitting around on Christmas, and she says, yeah, she doesn't really believe in God anymore, doesn't really want to believe in God. She's like, she just doesn't care. And then my other sister-in-law tells me, she said that she used to read the Bible all the time when she grew up, and she was really into it. And then what happened was, she just decided she didn't want to believe anymore. And she told me last time I talked to her, she said she doesn't really want there to be a God. That's what she said. Both of these two have really good, comfortable lives. There's no reason that, I mean, there's no, like, nothing bad happened to them. I can't say nothing bad happened to them. Everybody has something bad happen to you, but nothing like life-altering, monumental, terrible thing happened to them. They just decided that they walked away for their different respective reasons. And so so that's another thing that could happen. So, and then as far as my dad or my mom, both of them are very weak Christians, but they both have the fear of God, which is pretty important. My mom even said one time, I'd be afraid to, she goes, I'd be really afraid to act as if I think God is not true. And she said she would be fearing the consequences. So yeah, there are consequences, but they're self-choiced. So they're your choice to do that kind of thing. So so that's the bottom line. So anyway, so Nathan, if you want to tomorrow, maybe get on, because I know it's pretty late where you are. I would guess, I think you're what, 5 hours right now, 6, you're probably 11 o'clock at night. So maybe tomorrow we can chat, maybe get Kamil involved or something like that. Could be my channel or your channel if you want. It'd be funny to get Veracruz in there too, since she's your girlfriend, and that could be an interesting conversation. And so the main intention, Nathan, since you just got on here, the main intention, the reason why you see that my title is the same as your title, it's because I was listening to your video and I didn't like what Kamil was saying. So I decided I would make my own video rebuttal. And so that's what the beginning of this video was doing, rebutting what I was hearing come out of the mouth of Kamil that I didn't like. And not because I didn't like it, because it's because I didn't feel it's true, what some of the stuff that Kamil was saying. And it's not necessarily Kamil's fault. It's because he reads people like Bart Ehrman. It is Bart Ehrman's fault. Bart Ehrman knows what he's doing. Just to point out something with Bart Ehrman, in case you guys don't know, Bart Ehrman had an advisor called Bruce Metzger, who's since passed on, but Bruce Metzger was a Christian, and their textual criticism and all that kind of stuff comes from Bart Ehrman. And Bart Ehrman wrote this book called Misquoting Jesus. And in this book, he quotes something that he said with Bruce Metzger. He said that the core tenets of Christianity remain the same as they were in the original documents today. And so Bart in the book actually admitted that the resurrection and the other core tenets of Christianity are not corrupted. And then he say that out of one side of his mouth, and on the other side, he's basically saying that we played a phone game and the information's been completely corrupted. So you got to look at what you're reading here, because he said that in his appendix, in the second version of this Misquoting Jesus. And then after people were calling him out for him saying that in debates, that's how I heard about it. Then he pulled it out of there for the third edition. So that's kind of dishonest that he took that little quote out, because I think the quote actually condemned him for sort of being too liberal with what he's finding. So that was a big problem. So the Lazarus syndrome, also known as auto-resuscitation after failed cardiopulmonary resuscitation, is the spontaneous return of a normal cardiac rhythm after failed attempts at resuscitation. Interesting. So yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and close off this stream. I want to say thank you to everybody. So please like and subscribe if you haven't done that yet. Please come again. I might be live this weekend. Talk to other people if they want to go on. And I already talked to Nathan. I don't know if he's still in here. I don't see him anymore. So that's the point. If any of you guys ever want to come on my channel, you want to have a chat, even like a casual conversation, just send me, comment on the channel. And I pretty much read every comment. And so I had a bunch of words that I had ruled out for showing up in my comments. And then I found 140 comments that I never read because they were hidden, because I hid words like idiot. So I decided that I would not hide those words anymore, so I can see all the comments that I get, because unfortunately I don't want to not see the comments. So and then I can delete them if I see something I find incredibly offensive. So that's the bottom line there. So if you guys want to come in sometime and chat, Brian Stevens, I know you've been in here before, if you guys want to, and Gavin's been in here before, and I'd love to have Susan come on sometime. John, that'd be great. Any of you guys, really, Mind Onion, Utopia Buster. If any of you guys want to come in for a chat, just let me know, and you're more than welcome. And that's that. And so I will go ahead and I'm going to cut the stream, and I will hopefully talk to you guys again. Have a great Friday night. Stay healthy. Don't go out. And goodbye.